Hi, welcome to Monday Night Live. My name is Brendan Malone, and in this episode I'm going to be speaking to Daisy. Daisy is a 22-year-old YouTube content creator who was also a college senior studying communication and philosophy in the United States. Her YouTube videos centre around trans and detrans experiences, faith and culture. In her late teens, Daisy came out as a trans man and underwent the process of transitioning. Then in October this year, she publicly announced that she was detransitioning back to her biological sex. Without any further ado, let's have this profoundly important conversation with Daisy about maleness, femaleness, transitioning, detransitioning, and probably most importantly of all, the question of faith. Daisy, thank you so much for coming on the show to have this important conversation. I was profoundly moved and touched by the video that you released a few weeks back, sharing your story so honestly. Let's go back to the beginning, to perhaps when you were a bit younger and you started to experience that dysphoria about gender and your body and everything else. What was that like for you, and what were some of the experiences you had?
I had a pretty conventional transgender kid narrative. I remember being like as young as 4 years old and telling my parents and family members that I want to be a boy, or that some essential part of me is a boy. And, I really kind of focused on gender a lot as a child. It wasn't really ever connected to my body. I mentioned in my video that I never had physical dysphoria, which is basically the feeling of discomfort that happens when somebody who is dysphoric looks at their physical body and feels like it's alien to them, like it should have different features. It should have features of the opposite sex. I didn't really have that feeling about my body. I just kind of wanted to socially be a boy. And as I grew up and, went through puberty and entered high school and sort of figured out what my sexual orientation was, that just kind of, it didn't bring me any clarity. The feeling persisted. But again, it was not physical dysphoria. It was, I guess you could call it social dysphoria. And so, I never really felt like I fit in with girls or guys, really. I always really wanted to have a masculine aesthetic, and I didn't really know why. It kind of just always was the case for me. And so in around 2015, I was a junior in high school. I started researching, like, what does it mean to be transgender? And that was when, there were a lot of the concept of a gender identity became, sort of slowly more well known. And I started researching like FTM, female to male transgender. And eventually I was like, this makes perfect sense. Like, I think this is what I have to do. This sounds exactly like how I feel. And everybody wants to be their true selves. And that was, part of the rhetoric that was really heavily tied to that was that, you can be your authentic self. You can be the best person that you can be. It's kind of like this far off future where you can be happy. And I was like, well, I think I need to do this, because if I don't, then I'll just be like, I won't be myself. I'll be empty. And so, yeah, I came out as trans when I was 17. I had just turned 17. And then I continued to transition until 2020, till I was 22, which is how old I am now.
Yeah. Tell me, what was that process like? what was practically involved? I mean, share as much as you feel comfortable with, of course, but what was that process of
Yeah.
transitioning? Because obviously people use that word to mean different things.
So I came out at the end of my junior year, and that basically consisted, like, the first year of it was basically me telling everyone in my life, all of my friends, all of my family members, telling people my new name and my pronouns, sort of getting, I mean, I already had a lot of men's clothes, but, kind of just making my wardrobe like fully men's clothes, buying a binder, which, compresses compresses one's breasts so that I looked flat chested. Um, I already had short hair, so I didn't have to do that. And then I went on, I started taking testosterone when I was 18, so about a year after I came out. And then I was on testosterone for 4 years, and within those 4 years, my voice dropped. I got a little bit of facial hair. Um, I experienced hormonal changes. Like, it essentially put me through a male puberty.
Yes.
And then in 2018, I had top surgery, which is a double mastectomy. And that was pretty much the last physical thing that I wanted to do. I didn't want to do anything else because I thought, anything else would just be too invasive. And so I think I consider the very last step of my transition was my legal name change. And the reason why that took so long is because I just, it cost a lot of money, but I was able to get it waived, and it was just a more complicated process, oddly enough, than getting surgery. But yeah, those were the practical steps.
I guess along this journey, at each stage, you're looking for a sense of fulfillment. You're trying to find yourself, right, and your real identity in this. Is that what you experienced along that journey? Was each stage giving you more of a sense of flourishing, more of a sense of identity, or was this something that just still wasn't quite meeting that need?
I felt a sense of elation after every step. I felt a lot of excitement. I felt a lot of excitement for the end result. I was like, I must be moving in the right direction because, I'm becoming this new person, and like that notion was just really exciting to me. And, it did give me a lot of social confidence. So I think I probably misinterpreted that as what you're describing as, flourishing. Um, and so naturally, if I'm feeling elated and excited after each step, then I'm going to assume that I'm heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
But I think, I wasn't quite at the point where I was questioning what I was doing because, I'm thinking like, well, if I feel any type of anxiety about this, if I feel any sort of like um, uncertainty, um, then, just wait until you're finished and you've done everything, and then like you'll be happy. You
Yeah.
can fit into this category that you've wanted to fit into your entire life. But then once I completed like the last step, the doubts that I was having just got stronger. And I actually, like I said, I never had body image issues,
Yeah.
but after my mastectomy, I actually experienced body dysmorphia for the first time in my life. And it wasn't like, oh, I wish I had my breast back necessarily. It was just like, I still don't look like a man. Like, I look off. Like, I felt like my body was like just jarring to look at. And I was like, okay, well, this isn't supposed to happen. Like, I should not be having body image issues as a transgender person post transition. Like, I should be feeling good about my body. And at the very beginning, like after I got my mastectomy, and I was, felt, the sense of freedom. I'm like, yeah, I don't have to bind anymore. I can do physical activity without, running out of breath because of the binder pressure. So, there was a sense of relief and freedom, but like that was pretty short lived because I like I didn't really want to go out in public. I was like covering my arms because I felt like I was too scrawny for a guy. And that is like, one can, in a sense, get over that, but it was like, I would not be having these problems if I hadn't transitioned in the first place. And that was a really difficult thought to deal with, because that kind of trapped me into like, well, what do I do now? What do I do next?
Tell me, it's a pretty big step to take any sort of surgical intervention in a situation like this. Did you did you ever, or have you ever experienced a sense of grief about, obviously to remove your breasts as a female? It's a big step. It's a big change. Has that ever been something you looked at and you thought, gosh, I carry a sense of grief around that, or was your focus elsewhere the whole time?
Yeah, the way I think about it now, I'm not sure if grief is exactly the right word.
Hmm.
Um, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how much I regret it. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, I wish I hadn't done it. I wish that I had, left that part of me untouched. But at the same time, it was going to happen. There was this kind of inevitability to it. Um, and so, sure, I guess grief would actually work, because it does seem like kind of a tragedy. I mean, again, I feel very fortunate that I'm not in a lot of like mental pain over it every day. It's like, yeah, there's nothing you can do really, but um, it's that kind of inevitability. It was going to happen. It's done. Um, that like sort of makes it a little bit easier to deal with.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's why I don't even like necessarily using words like regret. I just don't. I think I needed to go through it, and it's unfortunate that I am, a woman without breasts, and I don't really, I didn't have to be. Like, I wish I could have known then that I didn't have to, that I shouldn't do that, but that's impossible. So,
Yeah. So why worry? Tell me, when did you begin to experience doubts, though, that were serious enough to make you think, actually, I'm heading in the wrong direction here. I need to detransition. What was that process like for your realization?
well, one of the things, like just one of the practical things, was that I've always wanted children. When I transitioned at 17, that seems so far away that I'm like, okay, I'll figure it out. I can adopt. I can do a surrogacy, and it's like, now that I'm 22, I I have realized that I really want to have biological children. I also want to adopt, but I really feel like the experience of giving birth is something that I need to experience, and something that I've always wanted, even more so now. And so I was like, well, okay, I could get pregnant as a trans man, but I mean, I feel like when you become a parent, I don't want my identity to be really a part of it. It's no longer about my identity. I don't know if I want my kids to call me dad. I don't know if I want to explain to them that I'm trans. I don't know if, I mean, I kind of just want a traditional life. Like, so I guess that means I want to be a mom. So that was one really huge reason. And another is that, and especially during quarantine, because at the height of lockdown in May, that was really when I decided, like, yeah, I need to do this right now. Like, there's no use in waiting. Like, I need to start this right now. Um, I thought a lot about like when you're alone, and there's this sense of incompletion. And like I said, it gave me a lot of social confidence. But at the end of the day, literally, like at the end of the day, when I would come home, I'd be like, I am there's this dissidence that I'm going to have to deal with for the rest of my life, because I know that I'm not only not biologically male, but it became clearer to me that I'm essentially not male. I am essentially female. Um, and it was like, I don't think I can deal with this dissidence for the rest of my life. Like, I don't think I'm going to go to the grave as a trans man. So that means that somewhere along the line, I will detransition. And I didn't know when it would happen. I didn't want to do it at that moment, because I was just like, that was just too scary for me, frankly. But it was when I decided that, you know what, it was a Thursday. Thursdays were my shot day. Thursdays was when I injected the testosterone. One Thursday came along and I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm just bringing myself, one step closer to sterilization. I've known for like a year now that I'm deceiving myself and lying to myself, and I'm going against my convictions. And so I'm not going to take testosterone anymore. And that made it real. That kind of also meant that, like, well, I guess I'm detransitioning now.
So you make the decision that you're going to detransition, but what does detransition mean and for you in your situation?
Some people who detransition, just like how people transition, they do it differently. Some people, still present the same way they did before. They just don't identify themselves as male anymore. I am basically, I'm basically kind of doing a 180. Like, I still want to obviously, like, not fake it and like wear frilly dresses all the time. Like, that's not me. I'm like a masculine. I still like a masculine aesthetic.
Yeah.
But like, I'm trying to grow out my hair and like learn how to do makeup again. Not because I'm trying to fit into this cultural trope again. Like, I know not to do that again. It's just like, I want to do it. Like, I want to know what I would look like if I, had not um, gone so far into the transition. Like, I want to make my outward presentation to look female, and that also, involves changing name and pronouns. Physically, there's not much I can do. I mean, yes, I stopped taking testosterone, and that that brings a sense of another sense of wholeness. It's like, I feel more like conflict going on in my body, like where, because hormonal changes when you're on testosterone as a female, like you really don't feel like yourself. You feel like a teenage boy, frankly, and it's weird. And Yeah, I feel more like myself in every meaning of that word. So, and I just recently, like, well, I was originally not going to start telling people until like next May. So I was like, okay, I know I'm going to do this and I'm going to physically start doing it and like prepare for it, but I'm not going to start telling people until May. But I quickly realized that I wasn't going to be able to wait a year. So I did my whole school semester as Oliver, as a guy, and with the internal knowing that like I'm not a guy. Um, and I just recently started telling my coworkers that like what's going on, and so it's really weird. Like, I've been living somewhat of a double life for the past 7 months, and at work, like half the people call me Ollie, half of the people call me Daisy. So I'm just really looking forward to when everybody knows and there's not any more confusion, which will be hopefully soon, because I plan on living as female full time by like January, February. And yeah, the more people I tell at work, the more comfortable I feel at work. So yeah, it's been really confusing and a lot more awkward than my initial transition. Changing your gender twice in your life is kind of excessive.
It's interesting, isn't it? It seems to me that the current cultural climate we're in, that to come out and to say, I identify as trans and I'm going to transition, that's almost a very celebrated event. But it seems possibly to have someone come out and say, well, I'm detransitioning, it certainly doesn't seem to attract the same acclaim. Have you had any negative reactions to your announcement? People in your circle or family or people close to you?
My family's has had a pretty positive reaction, especially my parents. They didn't think that I should have transitioned, so they were pretty happy when I told them I was detransitioning. But I haven't had people have like negative reactions in a sense that like it feels hateful or like they think that I'm harming the trans community. I mean, I've had a few people. I'm pretty open with my journey, I guess, and I've had a few people online say like, "You're a traitor to the trans community." I don't take those seriously, but like, those seem to come from a place of insecurity. But like, it is kind of uncomfortable in some, because like people don't know how to. This is not a very well known phenomenon. Like, people don't really consider that transgender people can sometimes regret their transition and then go back. Everyone knows what transgender means, but they don't necessarily know what detrans means. I will give you an example. So I told one of my professors like about a month ago, and because I wanted to write my final paper on my experience, and I was like, okay, well, when I propose my topic, I'll have to tell him. And so I told him, and he looked like heartbroken. There's so much pity that comes with it sometimes. Like people kind of feel bad about your situation for you and like catastrophize it for you. And it's like, that's kind of a tone deaf response, in my opinion. No one ever reacted like that when I told them I was trans. It was usually congratulations. No one congratulated me. I don't need people to congratulate me, but it was just like, an interesting thing I noticed. And I definitely don't want people to be heartbroken for me, because at this point, like, I'm not necessarily heartbroken over it. Like, I'm feeling pretty good about the whole thing, honestly. So
you mentioned briefly in your video your parents. What advice do you think you'd give to perhaps parents out there? Like I'm a father of 5. I've got 4 daughters, and I can't imagine them having to struggle with some of these challenges that you talk about in your video and that you've been through. But obviously, a lot of young people do now have this experience. What do you think parents can do in this situation to authentically love their children, but also at the same time, I guess, be wary of any sort of ideology that would want to try and impose itself upon their children, prematurely, and force them into sort of boxes or anything like that?
It's really hard, because if your child is really suffering from gender dysphoria and hasn't like convinced themselves that they have gender dysphoria based on like the internet and ideology, and I feel like I sound a little facetious when I say that, but I'm saying like that's kind of what happened to me, more or less. Yeah. If you as a parent like tell your kid, I don't think that you should transition, I don't think you are trans, your kid will probably not respond well. They will probably feel like their entire self is being denied by their parent, and that can feel really, really hurtful. So it's really tricky. I would say, like, ask them about, ask them very open-ended questions about like the research that they've been doing, because a lot of this involves research. I mean, I don't think that teenagers necessarily even make this decision flippantly. I think that a lot of thought goes into it, and it's like, and a lot of distress goes into it. And it's like, am I really trans? Like, I think the majority of the time it's not attention seeking, it's not, trying to be cool. That's too clean of an answer.
Mm.
It's like, I really don't know who I am and I'm desperate for a solution. So I would say ask them open-ended questions, and really try to talk to them about it, because I remember, like, my parents didn't really want to talk about it with me, and I really wanted to talk about it with them because it was this really big thing in my life, and I kind of felt like they would shut me down. So, stand your ground if you really don't think that it's a good idea. But also, like, don't do your best to not make your kid feel ostracized or ashamed. Definitely.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the sort of I guess the philosophical questions around this. I think certainly also there is a moral component with some of the questions involved here that's worth discussion, and it feels to me like that just is pushed aside in our society, or treated as if it's some form of prejudice to even raise the questions. But first of all, when I look at the concept of transitioning from an outsider looking in, to me it seems philosophically inconsistent with what I understand to be the sort of the core ideological claims of the transgender movement, in the sense that the movement itself is built on this idea that your maleness and your femaleness, that first of all there shouldn't be a binary there. Secondly, that there is that your physicality of your maleness or femaleness has nothing to do with gender. And yet, if that is the case, then the question arises, why do people need to change their physical bodies and to fit into either one or two gender categories to go through a transitioning? Do you think there is a philosophical challenge there? Is that something you ever considered?
Yes, that is one of the questions that sort of bothered me the whole time. There are various, like, sects within the trans community, where people will grapple with that question. Trans people themselves will be like, what does, is there actually a binary, or is it all very fluid? Like, it's debated within the trans community. But unfortunately, most of the debate that I've seen that I was very interested in, it, like, doesn't really lead anywhere conclusive, or it doesn't even, like, go to a healthy place, because the people in the trans community who are a little bit more like, this is only for social comfort. Like, no, you can't actually change your sex, and gender and sex are connected, and maybe have, like, a little bit more of a traditional view, are kind of labeled as bigoted in a sense, or invalidating somebody else. And another inconsistency is that it's to say that you have, like, that your essence is a different gender. I mean, that's an inherently religious question.
Yes.
But the idea of religiosity is usually very, very separate, when talking about transgender issues. And so people don't really, on the one hand, it's like, well, people are kind of using that metaphor, like, I'm, the man and woman's body, vice versa, to just kind of describe how they're feeling. They might not necessarily mean it literally, but that is still an inherently religious statement. So it's like, well, we're dealing with the religious here. It seems like, I mean, it's pretty clear that we are. Because if you take that out of it, it's just it's just feelings, and, like, you won't really find a lot of trans people admit that, like, it's just a feeling. It's kind of hard to get out of that. So yeah, there are, and the whole thing with, like, gender roles should be gone, but also if you're a trans man, I mean, I don't know. There are two sides, I feel like, because I feel like these are pretty obvious contradictions. So it's kind of divided the trans community against itself, which is interesting to watch, but I haven't seen a lot of fruitful conversation about it.
Do you think that that lack of fruitfulness, because it seems to me, if I put on my Aristotelian hat, I'm going to say that, what a conversation like that is really trying to get closer to the truth. But if you have a very relativistic starting point and where you say literally, I will create my own identity, that's how relativistic it is it hard then to say, well, let's try and resolve perhaps a tension that exists within a community that starts from that point?
Yeah, and I guess it is pretty relativistic, and I've always been somebody who believes in absolute truth. It's just hard to place the concept of identity and making your own identity in absolute truth, because absolute truth is above you. I mean, it's something that's outside of yourself. But I guess it's kind of the idea that like you know can find your absolute truth. In America, especially, individualism is a really deeply held value, and so I think that like individualism and authenticity and like make self-made man, that whole thing, like I took that very literally. So I think that is like kind of conflicting with essentially God. I mean, absolute truth I think of as God, and so that makes a lot of sense why it's caused so much like cultural discomfort and conflict.
You talk about in your video, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase you here a little bit. You mentioned this idea of, I think you called it the sort of the 2015 transitioning trend or something along those lines, referring to a period about 5 or 6 years ago where that sort of became a bit more of a thing we heard about, certainly, and people were coming out saying, I'm transitioning. I've read research over the last couple of years, and this is people who you were not even in the religious camp, who are just looking at this, I guess, from a purely sociological perspective. And they're saying things like, prior to, say, 5 to 10 years ago, the incidence of neonatal females who would then go on to say, well, I'm actually male, was so rare that it was considered almost practically non-existent. And now it's become a statistically measurable thing that they're saying this points to an element of social contagion. Now, obviously, it's not someone just being flippant, but do you think that that's a reality here, that people at their probably one of their most pivotal points of forming their identity through their adolescence, that they can be susceptible to a social contagion effect if that is what's happening?
In terms of like it happening more often with females, I mean, there are a number of theories, I think. One is as to why more people seem to be coming out as FTM rather than MTF. One is that body image issues in a more general sense could be mistaken for gender dysphoria. There's like gender non-conforming lesbians, for example, like are probably more likely to transition because I think it's also possible that females think about their identity a little bit more. I mean, that's kind of, I feel like I might be reaching there, but it also could be because females who transition to males are generally more socially accepted than males who transition to female. I always imagine that to be kind of a scarier thing, and something I think, like, I could understand someone being more hesitant to come out as a trans woman than as a trans man. I never experienced any street harassment, because if I didn't pass, people would, it wasn't as like grotesque to people, which, that's a deeply rooted cultural thing, is like we tend to be more off-put by like feminine men than masculine women. Yeah. Like you saw it in the whole thing with like I don't know if you saw the controversy with Harry Styles wearing a dress.
Yes.
On the cover of that magazine.
Yes, absolutely.
That was like really, really controversial. But if a woman wore a suit, I don't think anyone would care. There seems to be a pretty stark difference there. So it could be, just a feeling of social acceptance, or a combination of mistaking body image issues, which females tend to experience more of with gender dysphoria.
Ironically, I think that's one of the things too for me. Again, another inconsistency I see is that in the age of body positivity, where we say, particularly to females, your body doesn't need to be changed, it's good the way it is, just embrace it. But in this area, when it comes to identity around gender and body, we say, well, actually, we support and we think it'd be a good idea to change your body if you feel that way. But it seems it's the one bodily dysphoria we treat a little bit differently. Do you see that, or do you feel that that's the case or not?
That's something that I've grappled with as well, because I've heard the same argument. It's like, you wouldn't tell someone who is anorexic that they're fat and they need to lose weight. So it's like, why do we tell females who are gender dysphoric to cut off healthy breasts? And the way that I would kind of justify it in my head when I was transitioning, it's like, well, if you tell the anorexic woman to try to lose weight, she will die.
Yeah.
If you cut off healthy breasts, then you won't die. But I was too consequentialist in my thinking there. That seemed like too clean of an answer. Yeah. It's the comparison still stands, the inconsistency still stands, and it's because of just the ideology that's attached to it, which again is very religious in nature. If you have any sort of qualms about gender ideology, then your character will be questioned.
Yes.
And so I think, unfortunately, it's has a lot to do with like wanting to be respectful and, not say anything that's like out of line. But I also kind of feel sick thinking about like the surgeons who actually perform these surgeries, and the endocrinologists who are handing out these hormones without doing any sort of questioning. It was so easy to get my hormones. I did not have to undergo any psychological evaluation. I got them within an hour.
Wow.
And so, it really seems like people are being taken advantage of, for profit. And yeah, it's now really, really concerning. I really hope that the amount of people who are detransitioning, while I don't really wish this experience on anyone, but something good might come out of it. And that's that, like, okay, we actually really need to look at this ethically and, take the results into account, and see the harm that's happening to some people. Yes, there are people who transition and it's right for them. They turn out like feeling closer to their true selves. Like that is a reality. Not everyone will detransition. But it's just really hard because it's like, I was like fairly confident for the first 3 years of my transition. And it seemed like all of the signs were pointing that I should transition. But I really don't think if the ideology was not a part of it, if I hadn't like gone so deep in the trans internet culture, and I hadn't been kind of I guess brainwashed would be an apt word, then I probably wouldn't have done it.
I mentioned before the moral question, and there's a few I think that float around here, but one big one I really I think is something that absolutely urgently demands a question, is the issue of putting children onto things like puberty blockers, or transitioning, quote unquote, children. It seems to me it's one thing to say that if you've got an adult who's giving adult consent to something like that, I would question whether often even that can be verified safely. Like if you've had, say, 5 years from 15 to 20 where you've been constantly exposed to only one way of thinking about an issue, and then you say, I'm going to make a decision at 20, I think even then there'd be big questions about, is that informed consent? But it's one thing to say, well, an adult is making an informed consent decision, but to put a child on puberty blockers, and we seem to be seeing a lot more of this now, it seems that that's a whole different issue, and yet more and more that is becoming pushed as a normative thing to do, or it certainly feels like it. Do you think that we're going to have a reckoning as a society about that aspect of this?
Yeah, the notion of children transitioning deeply disturbs me. I mean, I've never really, I've never really been on board with that. You know, sometimes I would think like, well, if the dysphoria is really bad, but it's like, if, like you said, even like transitioning at all at any age is an inherently dangerous thing to do. It's an inherently risky thing to do, and it's to put a child on puberty blockers for the parent to do that, for the parent to tell their child like you are transgender, you're a girl, um, is really dangerous because the child, like when I was a child, I did not have a sophisticated understanding of gender. I just was, learning from what I saw, learning just from observation, kind of sort of putting it together and realizing that there was something kind of not right for me. I would not have been helped in any way, shape, or form if I was put on puberty blockers, or even if I, was allowed to like socially transition.
Yeah.
I think it would have confused me because gender and identity is just not really something that I mean, I'm trying to decide if identity is, it can be taught kind of to a child in like very simple terms, but to actually live that out, and like take physical steps is not. Yeah, like I there was this clip that I saw on Twitter of this uh, young boy. They're at like this utilitarian universalist church, and they have him come up on stage and they give him a microphone, and they're like trying to get him to say like, I'm a girl, I use she her pronouns, and he's like, I don't want to. He's like, I don't want to do it. He's like 6 years old,
Yes.
and he's like, really like, I don't want to do this. I'm. So he gives it to his mom, and his mom is like, so and so is a girl and uses she her pronouns, and then they all kind of creepily collectively say like, we validate you or something, and it's like, what do you think you're doing? Like genuinely, what how can you think that what you're doing is good? The child is clearly uncomfortable. The child probably has like verbalized some kind of like gender dysphoric, probably has said things like, I want to be a girl. And, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they're not like really trying to like force it, but it really seems like it's very, very forced.
Yeah.
So I've always thought that was incredibly dangerous and um, uh, flippant, I guess, and irresponsible, and just really, really not good.
In your video, you talk about your experience with Christianity. You studied a bit of theology. You went through a phase of atheism. It's quite fascinating how you talk about you were always, even in that phase of atheism, you always knew that God was there. That's not something that ever left you. Can you tell us a bit about that part of your journey? And one question that I was pondering was, do you think that that period of rejection of faith in any way was connected to your experience around transitioning? Almost like, well, mum and dad, you can't tell me what to do. I will really chart my own course in every way.
My atheist phase began in like 8th grade when I started thinking about hell. I was terrified of it, and I was like obsessively researching, like, am I going to hell? If I swear, am I going to hell? If I do this, am I going to hell? And then one day I kind of was just like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. I don't actually know. Like, what? This is silly. And I kind of just threw the whole Christianity away. I was like, I no, like I'm not going to let this constrict me. This is just completely illogical. And so, there was a sense of freedom in that. A sense of like I can do what I want now and not worry about hell, which doesn't exist. And So the reason why I say that I don't think I was ever truly atheist was because there were moments of desperation where I would pray to God,
Yeah.
And it felt like a very genuine call to prayer when those kind of things would happen, and I even felt a closeness to something.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of dismissed it though, because if you have an experience like that after being an atheist for a long time, you're not always necessarily going to be like, oh, I prayed, that means that God is real, and now I'm going to convert to Christianity. It takes a while.
Yeah.
And I've always been interested in philosophy, but like maybe 2 years ago now is when I started getting into theology. But I always kept a certain distance from it because it's like I'm trans. I don't really know if I can like do both of these things. Like I know that there are transgender Christians. I'm not saying that it's totally impossible to be a transgender Christian. I'm just saying like for me, it's like I don't know if I could I don't know how to reconcile those two.
Yeah.
It seems like it was like I went through this period where I was going to a bunch of different churches, and every time I walked into a church, I felt like kind of like they don't know me. If they knew me, then they would reject me, which I know is not necessarily true. But it's like I always kind of felt like I couldn't reach God as while I was a trans man. And a part of that, I think, is a huge part of that actually is because simply I was going against my convictions by continuing to transition. Like I knew that I was lying to myself. I knew that very deeply.
Yeah.
I didn't want to really think about it, but it's like I knew what was going on essentially. And funny enough, my doubts actually kind of happened around the same time that I became interested in Christianity. And the way I thought about it was like, if I become Christian, then that means that I will have to detransition, and I don't want to do that. But then I ended up making the decision to detransition first. I think before I really like gave my life to God. And then I felt like that barrier had been lifted after I like accepted that I was going to detransition. It felt like something was lifted. I don't know if it was just like I don't really know how to explain that, but once I realized that veil was lifted, I started taking it really seriously, and I kind of really dove right into it. And it's not like when you become a Christian, you don't become a perfect person. You still mess up. I still mess up, and but it's like when I mess up, I just realize like how much I need God. Yeah. It brings me it doesn't bring me closer, because sin doesn't bring you closer, but it makes me closer.
Yeah.
I think it's yeah. So I've been reading scripture and like trying to find. I was going consistently to a church, but then my boyfriend and I decided that it's not really for us, and now we're trying to find a new one. So it's been kind of rough to like not have a community of people, because we really want like a community to other like-minded people who are looking for God and trying to know God. And yeah, so it's been the most like certain. I just feel very, very whole, in a sense that like I am there's no longer that dissonance between my physical body and my expression and my identity. Um, those are one and the same now, and wholeness of that comes with living with God.
Awesome.
And so yeah, it's really awesome.
That's beautiful. One of the things that I was really touched by in your video, it actually reminded me of Augustine. I just want to ask you to, if you can just quickly unpack it for us here, was you made this comment about, creating yourself and realizing that that wasn't a right thing to do. That you were a good creation, that not something that needed to be created by you. But it reminded me of that verse from Augustine where he's talking about his own experiences, and he's talking about God. He says, "Late have I loved you, O beauty, ever ancient, ever new." And he goes on to talk about, I looked for you in the created things, and I worshipped you there instead of worshipping the Creator. And it seems to me your story is really just, it could be very tempting to look at this and go, wow, this is so extreme, but really it seems it's just another variation of that same struggle that all of us have, that every human being has to confront and grapple with. Will I worship the Creator, or will I look for the created things and make them my God? Could you just unpack a little bit that point you made about that, because it was so beautifully put, about creating yourself?
Yeah, because I cannot find God if I only look within myself. And I think, that's really hard to understand when you say it, because it's like, well, where else? Where else would I find it? I mean, I think I like to think of it as I mean, the draw that I felt towards Christianity didn't feel like it was something that I chose.
Mm.
Um, I think I think that I found God because of God. I think that God took me towards Him. That's how I tend to think about it. It wasn't really like, yeah, I think there was something, outside of me that was drawing me towards it. But I also think that that same force took me through everything that I went through.
Mm.
Um, I think that it's possible that God will take you to a place that is farther from Him, but He doesn't intend for us to stay there. Um, and now the way that I look at the world around me, um, when I look at people I love, when I look at my dog, when I look at like um, a sunset or nature or some kind of like anything beautiful, I recognize God in it. But I first have to recognize God.
Yes.
I first have to acknowledge God.
Do you think that Christianity is perhaps missing what I would call an authentic anthropology in regards to this? I'm a Christian myself. I come from the Catholic faith tradition. One of our previous popes, Pope John Paul II, wrote a very beautiful theology called which was dubbed Theology of the Body, where he really unpacked this whole question of maleness and femaleness and what does it mean to be in the image of God. Interestingly enough, he also wrote something that's often called the New Feminism, which a lot of people, I've seen even secular feminist authors who really rate it quite highly. But it feels like, apart from sort of a situation like that or the odd isolated cases, I can't think of anywhere where really Christianity of late has grappled in a very serious way with bringing, say, the Incarnation, the idea of, God who actually takes on human form and takes on a body, and that's how important human bodies are. And sort of brought all of that wisdom and truth to these questions around bodily identity and gender dysphoria and everything else. It feels a little bit like we're missing an action as a Christian church on some of these issues. Do you feel that that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that I was trying to recreate an incarnation when I transitioned. But I was placing my my hope in the idea of becoming someone else, the idea of becoming someone who was other than the person that I was created to be. I don't know how I would have answered the question of, like, why am I female? Why is that your sex? Why did that happen? And it's like, I would probably give you some kind of materialist answer, but it's like, no, that there is something beyond uh, materialism and just simple arbitrary results. Why are you female? And I think, yeah, I don't ask myself that question. But in regards to what the church, like, I haven't heard a lot of sermons on body dysmorphia,
Mm.
which I think, if that would be uh, an applicable topic, I think gender dysphoria as well. Although that's very controversial, but it's like, we as Christians, we kind of have to get over the fear of being controversial and bothering people. um, but yeah, I think that would be a really meaningful series of sermons to talk about body dysmorphia / gender dysphoria um, in relation to the bodily incarnation, and just talking about the body,
Yeah.
like the human body and our relation to it.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of that in the church necessarily, because I think it's probably because people feel like they're treading into, you know, unsettling territory, and
Yeah,
they're
of
worried
course.
about losing congregants. But it's a I think it's clearly a much needed uh, um, thing to address.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because I look at the history of the Christian church, and there's an irony in all of this, because one of the first heresies that the church condemns and addresses is the heresy of Gnosticism, and one of their core variations of Gnosticism was this claim that the body was a bad and sort of disgusting thing, and why would the Son of God ever take on a physical body? And the church actually condemned that very strongly and said, no, that's not true. Christ actually does take on a body. He experienced everything we experience as human beings with bodies, and then he rises bodily from the grave, and then he ascends with that body into heaven. And we believe in a bodily resurrection. So bodies actually do matter, and they are part of, well, they should be part of this, I guess, theological discourse. But it feels like we haven't had that, and so or of late, and so we've left ourselves a little bit incapable, if you like, of engaging with a culture now that is really grappling with these whole questions of bodily realities almost.
The glory of the incarnation is
Mm.
God coming to us,
Mm.
to be closer to us. From in the entire Old Testament, we were separate from God because of sin,
Mm.
and like, we could not get any near God without dying,
That's right.
essentially. And so that's, I mean, yeah, the incarnation is like unutterably glorious. I mean, it's like the center of all history. Um, so yeah, I think that's talking about Christ in this is essential. Not just, I think that the whole, like, self love culture it can go very wrong, but I also think that there is a way to talk about self love in a way that is compatible with Christianity and complementary to Christianity,
Yeah, awesome.
in a way that is not narcissistic or proud. I don't think that the idea of loving one's body should be completely thrown away, but it's like, it's difficult to avoid uh, pride in a sense. Don't
Yes.
focus on the aesthetic
Yeah.
of your body. Focus like that. I think that's the key. Don't think about the aesthetic. I was thinking so much just about the aesthetic, and
Yeah.
coming from a place of vanity. Um, and so we need a deeper way of thinking about our relationship with our bodies, um, clearly. And I think talking about the incarnation and the resurrection, um, as a physical occurrence is the deepest way that we can talk about it, and the best way that we can talk about it.
Yeah, that's true. And I think one of the things too is that probably would help that, as I know in theology of the body, there's a very key theme of the idea that the bodily reality and our maleness and femaleness, they image God, and so they should always point us back to Him. When they are in proper order. It's never like the Greeks who would worship the body. We don't want to do that. It's always pointing us back to the Creator. What advice would you give to someone perhaps who has a friend, close friend, or a family member, or even if they're Christian, someone in their church who might have confided in them that they are experiencing some sort of gender dysphoria or they're struggling with these questions? What would you say to that person to be an authentic, loving friend? How would they do that well?
I'm trying to like avoid the obvious thing, which is like, show them love, show them Christ-like love. Yeah. But I mean, I would advise against trying to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
I would advise against saying things like, God made you a female, so you have to be a female. They might not be, in a place where they can receive that. And they can't. It was like a person cannot bring someone to God. I would say, I would honestly suggest maybe don't talk to them about their gender or their transition. I would say just talk to them about Christ.
Yeah.
And love them and support them as an individual as much as possible. I think it's probably fair to assume that they know what Scripture says, so maybe there isn't really a need to just kind of rehearse that and like tell them, throw these verses at them and tell them how to live their life and tell them that they're sinning. And because it's not like that is going to be news to them necessarily. And I think that most of the time they probably will be very will talk about Jesus, talk about the gospel, talk about the glory of God, and love them. And that's a simple answer, but I think that that's the best thing to do.
I know this might sound a little bit cliched, Christian, but do you see a ministry in your future after your experiences working with people perhaps who've had some of the same or struggling with some of these areas? Do you see that your experiences will be able to assist in some ministry capacity?
Yeah, I definitely want to go to grad school and study theology, I think, possibly get an MDiv, Master of Divinity, or something else within the realm of theology. And myself actually continuing, just doing my podcast and my YouTube videos and writing. I really want to read and write as much as possible so that I can, be as honest and articulate and, feel as knowledgeable as I possibly can on these issues. And talk to people. I love talking to people. In terms of, pastoral work, it's not something that I'm totally opposed to. It's kind of a new idea for me. I never really considered doing that before, but I love theology. I love the study of theology. And I love talking to people. So possibly.
Awesome. Well, I think that would be a great thing if that happens. And I say that not just someone, as I said, who was profoundly moved by your video and your honesty, but also as a parent, as a father, and as I said, I've got 5 kids of my own, 4 daughters. I think there's a real need for people to be able to speak into these issues and to bring a bit of truth and a bit of light into an area that's often sorely missing those things. Daisy, I just want to say a huge thank you for having the courage to share your story, to come on and to talk to us, and it's been a real blessing to have this conversation with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
When we wake, hear the birds and see the sun. Side by side our fears are done. Oh, the good times just begun. let's hold on tight. Found what we're looking for in life. Call us crazy, but things are finally right. With you and I, the future is bright.